Okay, there we go. Marvelous. Right then, in that case, what I'm going to do then is I have got a bit of a structure just to sort of kick things off. So I'm going to share my screen, which is my newest uh, thing that I've learned. Can everybody now see the screen that I have just shared? You should be
Yes, we
looking
can.
at. Yeah, perfect, perfect. If anybody has a problem, please let me know. But that is excellent. Um, right then. So as I sort of just sort of said, the I've set out what the format of today's session is. Really, it's an opportunity for us to have a chat about some of the consultation projects that you're working on, and opportunities for you to sort of ask questions, and we can think about design. Just to kick things off, I want to give some examples of some play park consultation that I've worked on, which I thought were quite interesting projects. Then, really, I want to open it up to sort of an open discussion about the projects that you're working on. And then I'm hoping that just to round things off at the end, um, we're going to have a little chat about well, we're just sort of next steps really, because I think that these sessions could be quite. We've only got an hour today, and it could be quite useful to sort of have these as a regular opportunity, because you'll be doing consultation exercises throughout the year. So it'd be nice to sort of give you an opportunity, an ongoing opportunity, to be able to sort of raise questions, and as you've got projects going on. So the first project, so the sort of the opening I wanted to sort of talk to you about was my experience of doing some play park consultations. These happened only a couple of years ago, so it's still quite recent projects. And there were two different projects that I worked on. One was up in Yorkshire at a place called Steeton with Eastbourne, and one was more locally in northeast Somerset at the Somer Valley Adventure Play Park, which is in Midsummer Norton. And basically, the design for these projects was very similar. Um, they were basically about a body, whether it was the council, it was the parish council in one instance, but it was also a local um, uh, uh, charitable trust in another, that wanted to access some money to improve play park facilities, and consultation was considered to be an important element of that, also to sort of justify the decision to spend the money. So what I've given you here on the screen is in the project that we did in Steeton with Eastbourne. We did a variety of different things, an online survey. I went to visit schools, local schools, and a nursery, and I met with both parents and I met with the children at the school as well. So you'll see from that a variety of different exercises that were done in the parish to try and gather some feedback. The online survey was very successful. You can see you've got 294 responses to that, in addition to the other exercises. So, in a research sort of way, what we're looking at here is a quantitative measure, which is the survey, and a qualitative measure, an opportunity to sort of get under the skin of some issues with parents and with children as well. And it was a pretty identical methodology that was delivered for the Somer Valley Adventure Play Park project. And obviously, you'll see, in addition to the different elements of the visits that were done, also the dates. So it gives you a feel for how long these projects were in the field, how long it took to sort of get round the schools, and how long we put the survey out for. Of course, one of the other important aspects of these things is, okay, well, so how successful were we in engaging? Who did we speak to? And I think sometimes with consultation projects, we get worried that we're not necessarily talking to a representative group within the community. We can't necessarily demonstrate that, but it's much better to be honest about who we have been able to engage with, and then perhaps down the reasons why you've not been able to engage with certain groups. Now, on the subject of play park research, you can see that in this is the Somer Valley project, 310 respondents were female, 26 were men. So men don't want to talk to me or anybody about children's play parks. It is what it is, but knowing that helps us understand the responses that we're getting, and also obviously a breakdown by ages as well. So, unsurprisingly, what we're seeing a large number of female respondents in the 25 to 44-year-old bracket, and we need, understanding that is actually just part of a project. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not valid. It's just that caveat that you have to recognise when you're doing it. Um, Now, obviously, one of the things that was relevant to to both of those projects was actually understanding where children are currently playing, because by understanding the parks that are currently being used, we can understand why people are going there. Is it about distance? Is it about the different type of play equipment that they've got there? And it enables us to sort of broaden out that conversation about, well, why do you take your children to that park? Is it because you meet the same people? You get the ball rolling basically from that conversation. But the lesson that I learnt from the first project that we did, which was the Soma Valley project, was actually in these projects, it's very easy to have quite a tight list of, okay, so we're going to look at local play parks. Give me a list of local play parks. In most places, you can get these off the internet. They're very good at sort of advertising play provision for parents and for families. But having a tight list didn't go anywhere near to actually gathering the huge amount of information that we gathered from the other category. So you can see that 44% of the people in the Soma Valley project told me about a play park that wasn't on my list. And so actually that's useful because it means you're gathering data, but of course it also sort of every day is a school day, and it helps you to understand, okay, if we're going to engage with the respondent, we have to do it on their terms. Sometimes we can be very predefined about the questions that we want to answer, but that doesn't necessarily match the experience that the respondent has. Um, Now, these projects were yes, they were about identifying what people value in a play park. That was the core element of it, because that's the decision that you want to inform. What equipment, what makeup, what format of the play park do you want? But they also gather a lot of other really interesting information about what people perceive about their local play parks, and also how people are using them. So the information I've got in the chart here talks about how frequently people are going to different types of parks. So there again, we've got an opportunity to differentiate in the analysis between the parks that people go to regularly and the parks that people don't go to regularly. Doesn't necessarily mean they don't value them, but it might be that they're a significant distance away. But people are still prepared to make that trip because of specialist equipment that those parks may have. So understanding that whole picture gives us a much more useful, rounded data set to look at. Of course, one of the other opportunities to do this is to collect data about the people using parks. So in this chart, what you can see here is we've collected some data about the age of the different children, and it became apparent to me that in terms of sort of play park use, we were looking at classically primary school age children. But of course, anecdotally, when we get into the qualitative, we do find out more about how older children are using parks, because they are a place to congregate. And quite often they will have covered areas, which means that even in weather like we're experiencing at the moment, you can actually sit and meet with your friends and go on your phone and perhaps do things that kids shouldn't be doing. But um, it's a useful opportunity to collect data on the people that are using the parks. Um, we also are collecting information about how people are accessing parks, because I think accessibility in terms of how you get there is also another really important part of the equation, to say, right, are people just going to a park because it's their local park, which means that pretty much doesn't matter how run down it gets, people will still go to it because it's local. Or are there people who who are going to drive a significant distance to access a park because of the equipment it's got there? So of course, if as a council you can combine the two, if you look at those parks that people are prepared to travel to and understand why they're going there, and you're able to put that equipment locally, not only are you potentially bringing people into the area where there could be other spin-off services, because they might be accessing local cafes and things like that, but going and doing their top-up shop in the local grocer's shop. Potentially you can make the case to say, well, look, rather than having people traveling out of our community to access play parks in neighboring towns, larger towns, actually we can reduce our vehicle movements, because we can provide provision that local people are going to value. Of course, I do recognise that the counter argument to that is you've done such a good job that people are now driving into you. But still, in terms of the wider picture, some of the other issues that may be driving your projects, it's quite interesting to understand people's different behaviour about why they're accessing parks. One of the other things, pieces of information that I thought was particularly interesting, was the time of day when people were accessing the park, and also whether it was a weekday or a weekend. Now, one of the reasons why I felt that this was particularly important is that one of the play parks we were looking at had was notorious for having antisocial behaviour, and I think that this type of data not only does it tell you, it sort of tells you quite a lot by not telling you. Because what it's actually saying is, well, maybe people are accessing or families are accessing the park when they know it's safe to do so. They're not going there at times of the day when they're concerned that there might be trouble. Now, of course, if you've got a good relationship with the local police force, your police community support officers, having this type of data might be quite useful in saying, look, if you're going to, maybe it's worth organising your patrols at these times when we know families aren't accessing, because that's where we've got incidents of antisocial behaviour and things that are going on. So there's added value in gathering this data, not just about understanding how your residents are using these facilities. Um, so, some of the sort of the classic market research equipment, this is the classic sort of chart used to drive my marketing manager up the wall, because there's a lot of stuff going on here. But effectively what it is, it's about understanding what people value in a park. And this is the bigger picture, because of course, yes, the equipment is always going to be one aspect of it, but understanding about parking, understanding about access to other services like coffee and tea and ice creams. In fact, the assumption from one of the organisations sponsoring this work was that parents wanted to have access to a load of refreshments so that they could sit and enjoy them while their children were playing. The parents in the qualitative focus groups that we ran said the opposite. They said the problem is pester power. So if you put on ice creams and chocolate bars and crisps and fizzy drink, my kid's going to be going on and on and on at me until I've bought them one. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not a good idea to put a refreshment kiosk next to a play park, but it's very interesting to understand that bigger picture, the whole picture. And that's sometimes something that just quantitative, just survey data, online surveys, even ones that are done in the high street, can't always tell you. That's why it's important to get the bigger picture. But of course, ultimately, all of this was about it was about equipment. And you can see in this chart again, what we did was we got people to provide feedback on the types of equipment that they valued, from very important to not very important at all. It's the sort of chart you'd expect to see in a piece of research like this. What you might be interested in is part of the methodology that was used in the qualitative discussion. So that's the discussions with children, with the primary school children that were using the parks, is actually how they talk about play. And this technique was used. It's called the Diamond Nine, and basically the children were encouraged. We had various different images. You'll see various different types of equipment that can be used. And the children in groups were encouraged to structure them. So the thing that they like the most goes at the top of the diamond. The thing that they like the least goes at the bottom of the diamond. And then they put in a hierarchical structure that identifies what bits of equipment they want. Now, of course, that's quite useful in of itself, as you can see from these images, that you get a feel for what people like. But actually, in the course of the discussion, it's really useful to say, well, why did you stick the zip line at the top? What is it you like about zip lines? And then we get into a conversation about that in the same way that, what is it you don't like about perhaps traditional seesaw type equipment and all that. I mean, obviously, want to make it slightly more interesting than I've just done, because otherwise the kids will clam up. But that's the theory. That's the theory behind it. And inevitably, with all of these projects, really what people want is the so what question. So what? Now, if we're having to go through the motions to access funding, then obviously the primary deliverable is whatever the funding body wants. And one of these projects was used to access funding from the National Lottery. So of course we had to make sure that all of those boxes were ticked. But if there's an opportunity for additional value added, then that's really interesting, particularly if your councillors are interested, if your residents are interested in things, and it could be things like antisocial behaviour. But there's an opportunity to use the research to sort of come to some conclusions and actually try and inform the debate. One of the interesting things on this slide, one of the conclusions that we made was discussions that we had with respondents around accessible equipment for individuals with a disability. And you might only get a very small number of that 340 odd or the 290 odd people who talk about that. But just because a small number of people raise something doesn't necessarily mean it's not important. So actually having that understanding of when you get that eureka moment, when you get that's really insightful, that's really interesting, that's really where the value, I think, of sort of research comes. Now I've been talking now for 20 minutes, and I would really like to throw this open to all of you, really. Did Before we perhaps get on to the wider conversation about the other projects that you might be working on at the moment, did anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to make about what I've presented as far as the play park stuff's concerned?
Ian,
I can't see any. Oh, hello.
sorry, hiya. Debbie at Netherhaven. Um, Hi, we're about to do a similar sort of thing about a play park that we might stop being a play park. But how do you actually put the survey out there?
So, right. So having a sort of a bit of a marketing plan is a good place to start. The obvious, the go-to place is whether you've got a local newspaper. So if in both cases we sort of had varying degrees of success with that. So a local newspaper would always be an option, but I do recognise that in Wiltshire there's some sort of weird and wonderful different types of publication. Some sort of parish publication. Some things come out monthly. So if there is anything that is going through local doors, then that would be something that would be a good idea to
Yeah,
include.
we've got a
Um,
monthly newsletter, so that would be the best place, I suppose. Then.
so the moment you think about that, then obviously publication dates become critical because, of course, if you are able to get something in, but actually they've only got 2 weeks or a week to respond, then actually the benefit of it, is
Lost.
limited. So
Yeah.
you've got to try, and if you can, you've got to try and factor in that around the publication dates.
Okay.
Obviously, we're living in a world of social media. And I mean, normally the old sort of thing was, well, we've put a link to the survey on our website. Well, that's fantastic, and I'm sure all of you have got some idea of how many people visit your website. But in the world of social media, then Facebook, um, you know, X, possibly Instagram, all of those things are resources to use.
Okay.
Um, and actually what I would do is I would think about sort of structuring it so you don't necessarily, it doesn't all go out in one go. If you think the consultation is going to be open for 4 weeks or for 6 weeks, then you think about different opportunities to drop in that reminder, that link, in the plan. Andy, I can see your hand up, so I'll come to you in a sec. Okay, I didn't want you to think I'd forgotten about you. um, the the Facebook groups can be really useful as well. Got lots of communities have got them. I know some can be a bit some can be a bit more, you know, um,
Get the warriors.
out there than others. But I mean, I think you'll have to take a judgment. The other
Okay.
thing that I don't think councils use enough is the networks from their councillors. So actually, if you think about it, your councillors may well be involved with Rotary, with local business groups, the Scouts, even sort of music groups or history groups, gardening groups. So actually, using them as an opportunity to sort of push that out is all part of that plan. So it's almost like you have the formal, then you have the informal. How can we top up? How can we keep going? One of the things that worked very well in the Soma Valley project was that they have a local community radio station. Now, I'm sure many of you will have an opinion about how many people listen to community radio, but what was really important about them is not necessarily about them talking about it on the air, but they've got a volunteer list of 300 people. So actually, by them sending it to their group, all of a sudden you've got a fantastic opportunity to engage. And of course, you'll see that we also did engagement with local schools. And again, schools will have things like newsletters. There'll be other things that you can do. People may be nervous about that because you think, well, if we only target the schools, or if we only target the cricket club or the rugby club or whatever, then of course we're going to skew the responses from them. But I think it's better to have a comprehensive plan of all of the possible lines of attack and then structure that. And then if you are getting to a point where you're a bit concerned that the response rate isn't as high as you want, then you've got these other groups that you can go back to and say, look, can you distribute this? Can you get this out there? Can you get talking about it? It would be really helpful.
Okay.
Um,
Thank you. Mm.
Andy, sorry about that.
No, no,
Fire away.
don't worry up on my behalf. I was just waiting. So we use surveys for, we spoke about it actually in Public Work Loan Board as a requirement to justify to DLUC the request. One of the concerns for us is the number of aborted surveys. So those that have started the survey only completed a third or two-thirds of the question, got fed up with the questions, and aborted it. So we've only got some of the data. It's a balancing act because councillors always want the open-ended questions for the detailed feedback to create word soups and all of those things. I'm much more of a closed question person because I think we get better yield in terms of participation. What the question is, what sort of ratio do you think is important between the sort of the open-ended questions and the closed questions? I think if you need to get a good mix, don't you?
Right. So what's always important, the one critical thing that's always important is the respondent. Because of course, if the respondent doesn't feel engaged in this process, you're not going to get anything back from anybody. And back from my days of doing a lot of work with the Market Research Society, the rights of the respondent and all the rest of it is a really big thing in the issue. But actually, this goes to the heart of what Andy's saying, because of course, if you make your survey so long, or if you provide me with so many different things that I need to do in terms of boxes I need to fill up with questions, then actually you're reducing the likelihood of you collecting data. So in the survey design stage, you have to make the surveys as accessible as possible, which means I would always be sparing of those open questions. But that's because I'm an exponent of multi-method projects where you use those online surveys or those high street surveys, perhaps even door-to-door surveys, as your quantitative grab. And then you're using other group discussions, and it might be a workshop session. You might invite people in, you might go to a particular group in the same way that I went to a school, and you sit down and you try and use that for that qualitative to try and get that context. So the boxes, the free text boxes, can be really useful, and word clouds and all the rest of it, I'm completely over that. They are, they have their place. But of course, if you overload the project with too much of that, and that's one of the challenges in a lot of projects that I've dealt with local councils, is that something delivered by committee means everybody wants to get their question in, and before you know it, you've got 4, 5, 6 pages of A4, and that will impact on the on the response rate. So that simply put, nice to have as opposed to need to have. Make sure you've got your need to have, then look to see how much tolerance you think there is in the survey for the other questions that people
Well,
might
that's
want
the
to
thing,
answer.
isn't it? I think the audience can be different for different surveys. And I think the other thing I wanted to add is that certainly in the last year or two, some of the online surveys have got an AI option in there where you can provide the data of what it is the audience, what sort of data you want, and it will give you the likelihood of how intuitive and how accessible that particular survey is, and what the likelihood is that people will complete it based on an algorithm of other similar surveys, which has been an incredibly useful tool. But thanks for that, Ian. That's really helpful.
No problem. Anybody else? Oh, Lee?
Yes. Once we receive all the data back, whose job is it to compile it all into those wonderful little graphs and charts and lists and bars and whatever?
See, oh, excuse me. That used to be the reason I used to get paid. Because of course the reality is that you can design a fantastic survey, and then absolutely somebody has to go and sit down and go through all of it, and it can be incredibly time consuming, and it actually goes back to the point that Andy was making about the open questions. Because of course the more open questions you've got, what you've got to do then is you've got to go through a coding exercise. So you've got to you're looking at each of those comments, and then you're trying to make some sense out of it. You're trying to bring some sort of commonality. Are they talking about antisocial behaviour? Are they talking about the quality of the equipment? Are they worried about wood chip? You're bringing together all of those themes. So again, let's go back. The real essence of all of this is about the planning. So if we go back to that principle of the planning, how long is my survey going to be? How many questions am I going to ask? And actually, I started making observations when I was talking to you about the data, about saying, well, let's look at what people with, say, young children's think as opposed to people with older children. Let's look at the people who walk to the play park as opposed to drive to the play park. I can come up with lots and lots and lots of really interesting variations on things we could look at. But of course, actually, if I haven't got the time to go to that level of detail, then it's a waste of time. So having a plan that says, right, these are the questions we absolutely need to ask, keeping a handle on how many open questions there are going to be and the potential for going and reading all of those comments and how you're going to group them, it really makes sense to sort of to look at this and try and block out your time. And allocate time, because one of the big problems with analysis, you all lead very, very busy lives, and the tendency is to dip in an hour here and dip in an hour there. I would say don't do that, because what will mean the analysis that you're doing will drag on and on and on. It's much better to say, right, I'm going to have half a day here, or I'm going to have 2 days there. Manage your time, and then thinking about the amount of time that you've got to do the analysis in, use that as some kind of benchmark when considering how many questions to ask and how much detail you want to go into. So that analysis planning stage is every bit as important as every other part of the project. Francis.
Oh, hi. Hello, Ian.
Hello.
Yeah, it's really kind of following on from the last question. So just from, I suppose, from my point of view, we're a very small parish council. So it's how we can apply some of this thinking in a really simple but effective way. And I think you probably touched on that around the planning issue. What can we realistically do and how do we do it? So I think there's some of that. But I suppose, we wouldn't be able to use very sophisticated tools to do lots of analysis, for example. So I suppose we have to kind of think what our starting point is and what's realistic. I was interested in that Diamond 9, which, without knowing more about it, looks very interesting, because we are thinking about play areas in our village. And it might be outside of this meeting, but maybe sharing that. So how do we get things like people to vote on, for example, what kind of play equipment they might want? What's a really effective way to kind of drill down on that? And then just the other thing very quickly is things like having to be very mindful about data protection, which I know you kind of perhaps talked about, but I suppose if the data's anonymized, like, I know you've done some of your analysis around gender and age, which of course is potentially quite problematic if you don't handle that data very well. So I think sorry, I know there's quite a few questions tied up in that, but I was kind of just coming at it from a very different angle about keeping it small, but useful at the same time.
So I think that, again, going back to my previous existence, it was part of my job to sort of almost not frighten people about those things, but come up with a reason why you need to go and pay somebody to do it. And there are good reasons when you do need to bring in professional support. But actually, in its essence, research can be something that is very, very accessible to everybody, whether they're in a professional capacity or not. I think it's about understanding the resources that you have, which then gives you the opportunity to reflect on whether you need additional resources to come in, and actually just getting a bit of a sense check. And this is something that I'd like to think that I'm in a position to do now for all of you, to come up with somebody to say, look, actually, that's a good plan. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Then what that should do is it should enable you to go and do a lot of this stuff yourself. Now, working with a group of people, hopefully then you can start breaking down some of the jobs that need to be done. And actually it will give people, particularly in a council environment, a collective sense of buy-in to the project. We've all invested our time in understanding. So actually that in of itself can be useful. And there are relatively accessible tools. I mean, I'm sure all of you have heard of SurveyMonkey. Now a lot of people are using Google Forms. We could have a highbrow conversation about the rights and wrongs and about the functionality that works and what doesn't and all the rest of it. Actually, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you've got an opportunity to do something, then take the opportunity that exists. And I mean, a lot of the analysis I do to this day, I still do in Excel. Now, I mean, Andy raised the issue of AI, and I think AI will be able to help a lot. going forward, particularly in terms of analysing large amounts of open question responses. I can see AI being very useful. But part of me, and you'll understand, as 20 years as a professional, this is why I feel the way I do. I don't want to trust somebody else to do my analysis for me. I want to have a good nose around. I want to have a nose around. I want to ask some questions. I want to get into the detail of it to understand what it's telling me. And I was always in a very fortunate position that, of course, I didn't have any vested interest. So actually, I just wanted to use the data for insight. One of the challenges is that we'd want to do a project because we've got a predetermined outcome. We think we know what it's going to tell us, and we go and look for that. And that's really dangerous, because I think sometimes the most interesting stuff I've found is things that I've literally come across. I had no idea I was even looking for it. So I would say that because of because of my sort of background. But I guess going back to your point, just involving people, getting a realistic understanding of the resources that you have available is the best way to start, and then you can go around filling in the gaps where you're a bit worried about that you don't have the resource, or you need another tool, something like that. Sue, you've had up your hand for a while, so I'll come to you.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Cool, lovely. I was just wondering, our player has reached the end of its life. We're in Avebury Trustlow. It's very Avebury and Avebury Trustlow. It's a very old player we've got. It's probably over 30 years old, and we're looking at redoing it. And we are opening our next parish council meeting to members of the public to come along and have discussion on this player and the work, and to share some of the work we've done so far. I was wondering, with your survey, what was the actual overall response rate for your survey that you sent out for one of your areas? Did you get a good overall response?
Yeah, I think the thing about the response rate is so for one of the projects we got, I think it was about 290 odd online survey responses, and the other one was just about 344.
How many did you write out to, though? What was the number you actually wrote out versus how many responses you actually got?
So nobody was written out to. The online survey was distributed purely through the local newspaper and through for local social media channels.
Okay.
So that's that. But that's why in the context of that project, what we did was, there were two approaches. So there was something that was out there to the general public so that they could engage with it if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And you can be really Rolls Royce about this. And I worked on we do another one of these projects. I could tell you about a parking survey that we did, which was a really fascinating piece of work. But in that case, the council did literally write to every single household in the parish, inviting them to fill in the survey.
Right.
Now, if you've got the opportunity and the budget to do that, then that's a fantastic thing to do. But not everybody does have. I mean,
No.
Andy, if I told you to write to everybody in North Swindon, you'd have a heart attack. So they don't always have the opportunity. So just being, but and critics of research will point to these things and say, oh, well, it wasn't open, and you excluded people and all the rest of it. But I think you've got to be, if the plan is an honest plan, and you say, right, we have got, these are our dozen available communication methods. We've got a window of 4 to 6 weeks. We are going to do everything we can to make sure that as many people in our community know about this as possible. Then you are giving people a reasonable opportunity to participate, and that's the critical thing. What we find is, by the time you go north of about 350 responses, actually the variation in what you're getting back becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. Now that is with a perfect distribution. And of course, what you saw from my survey was actually we had virtually no men filling it in, and we had an awful lot of women. But understand that's not necessarily a problem. Just understand that, and interpret it. So that's. I hope that's.
No,
helpful.
that's fine. Are you able to share your survey as a template, or is it just something we just make up from scratch? I just wonder if you've got best practice, whether it could be shared.
I'm sure I could dig something out for you.
Anything
but
you've
actually,
got to help.
One of the points I was making earlier, though, was actually when I first started doing this, I would never presume to be an expert on these things.
Oh, right.
It's only actually it's through the doing that you realise the questions you wish you'd asked.
Yeah.
You know, and I can say that now because I'm not. This isn't sort of reliant, but there's a lot of professional consultants that you'll meet. You know, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors out there about about how difficult and complicated and all these things is. But actually, being open and honest and learning through a process is really useful. So yes, the answer is definitely. There's stuff I can
Just
share,
as a
but
start, it'll be really useful. Yeah. All right. That's lovely. Thanks for that, Ian. Very helpful.
No problem. Teresa, did you want to ask a question?
Well, I was just going to add a couple of things. Is we've done some of the really obvious stuff that sometimes gets forgotten. We've put a gazebo up in October half term and stood there for a day in the play area and caught people that way. And we've put a QR code and stapled it to all the gates on the football field to ask the footballers and the kids to scan the QR code and get to the access that way. There's lots of different ones, but in answer to one of the other questions, Microsoft Office forms, which you get if you've got Outlook anyway, you get it free. It's got survey forms. I'm sure the others do it as well. And then it converts it to all those pretty pie charts automatically. You can ask it to do all of that for free. And what we tend to do is take any handwritten ones and input ourselves into that. And then they're all captured in one go. And you can press print and you've got a report. Not for a play area, but we've just done our neighbourhood plan and we had lots of community responses that came through Microsoft Office forms that way. And it took many hours to go through all of the open question responses we had from the community to a neighbourhood plan question and analyse it. And then my colleague ran it through AI. And so all of the other questions, it read all of the answers. So we had to put them into a spreadsheet, but because the answers were on Microsoft Forms, it automatically puts it into a spreadsheet for you that you can sort by policy number or question number or whatever. And we ran those responses from the community through AI, and it gave you a summary. And then it told you, the things that were most raised. And in our consultation statement, we cited that we had used AI to do that for the community responses because it proved that, a bit like Ian just said, that we weren't looking for answers to fit what we thought or to fit our policy. It was an independent artificial intelligence looking at all of those answers and bringing out the most common themes and words. So I just thought that might be useful.
That could be the AI could be the topic for our next survey surgery. I can't see any other hands up. So do you? I did sort of say part of this was about throwing it open for other people who've got other projects going on that they might want to sort of ask any questions about. I mean, I'm happy to sit here and talk about play parks. It's not a problem. But was there anything else that were there any other projects that you wanted to have a chat about?
I should just speak, Jackie.
I just worked out if you put your hand up, it turns into a yellow hand. That's pretty clever. I've got I've been given the responsibility for doing the early consultation for our neighbourhood plan. So would love to have a chat with Teresa Strange on how she got on and what they did, and anybody else who's had that enviable task. My first thought was I was very interested to see when you were doing face-to-face consultations, Ian, that obviously that appeared to be a fairly low turnout. My background in my previous job over the last 30 years, I found that responses to people coming to public meetings or evening meetings or discussion groups had changed markedly, particularly since COVID, that on the whole, people didn't seem to want to personally engage in things. And I wondered if that was something, whether that was an experience you'd seen.
I think the challenge for me on the classic public meeting is that I think a lot of members of the public are a bit nervous about going along because they don't know what it's going to be about. They don't know the format of it. They don't necessarily know how they fit into it. So I think that one of the most important sort of lessons for every consultation, whether you're asking people to fill in a survey or whether you're asking people to attend a discussion, is that people have got their expectations are really well managed in terms of, okay, so you want me to come to this, what is it you want me to do? Are you going to want me to just listen to something and fill something in? Are you going to want me to say something? Because of course, whilst you get some people who are more than happy to stand up in a room full of people and tell you what they think, actually other people can find that quite intimidating. And this is where we get into the realm of what is known, I'm sure this will resonate with all of you, as the usual suspects. Those people who are very good at telling you what they think about everything. The critical issue, whether you're talking about play parks, neighbourhood plans, doesn't matter what you're talking about, is that actually, are we hearing the voice of the majority? Are we actually understanding what most people think, as opposed to what a vocal minority of people might think? And that doesn't mean to say that the vocal minority aren't consistent with the majority, but it's actually asking that question: what are we getting back from this? Are we only getting people that always come to the same meetings? And what can we do to open up our, to make these more approachable? But I do think there probably has been, since COVID, a reluctance for people to just go and attend a public meeting. But then you get those subjects that really get people fired up. And of course, they're queuing out the door because they want to have their say, or they want to hear from a certain person who's got a certain point of view. So I think how you frame it is important. Just on the point about the number of people that we spoke to, the public meeting element of both of those projects was pretty awful, I have to say. Although actually, had we done a public meeting on the parking one, I think they would have been queuing out the door. But I wasn't too bothered about that, because when we went and interacted with a group of parents at the school, and we were able to sort of engage with 2 or 3 different classes of primary school children, we were getting really rich feedback from those exercises. So that was more important. Quality in that instance was more important than quantity.
No, and thank you, Teresa. Definitely love a catch up on that, because wearing my other hat, I'm also very interested in climate resilience, responding to climate change and so on, which certainly in our area there's a very low public awareness of that. So it's almost, I feel it's very important that the neighbourhood plan looks ahead and addresses that. So you've almost got to do a bit of an education piece before you ask people what they think.
Now, I know that Teresa is is certainly one of our resident experts when it comes to neighbourhood plans, and I wouldn't presume to start offering advice, because I've not been through one. So there is the mechanism of the plan, which I know Teresa has been through at length, a very engaged process. But obviously, when I look at these things, I'm looking at them from a community engagement perspective. What methods are you doing? And one of the things I noticed in the emails that I were getting from people who were keen to attend this particular session was that actually neighbourhood plans were coming up quite a lot, which was slightly worrying for me, because I'm happy to talk about play parks. But I'm thinking now, right, I'm going to have to start providing some guidance on neighbourhood plans. What I've got, because I'm conscious of time, we've got another sort of 12 minutes for the session. What I did do, and I'd be really interested in getting, I'm really interested in getting some feedback. If I'm talking nonsense, I think I'm in a room full of people who are going to tell me that. So what I did was I went away and did some digging. I went away and did a little bit of I went and read some stuff. And in fact, actually, at the end of this, I'll show you the stuff I read. But what I came up with, I'm not going to bored you with death by PowerPoint enough today. But what I wanted you to see was some slides that I'd prepared. And I've got a colleague here at Community First who is very engaged with neighbourhood plans and community housing, and I did share this with him for a sense check. But what I wanted to do was put together just some headlines to give you a bit of a structure, because I've talked a lot about plans in this. You know, the way to good research is to start off with that plan. So, okay, well, what would a neighbourhood plan consultation look like? So, the breakdown that I've got is what you can see here. This idea of early and ongoing engagement, establishing a steering group or working group, developing a communication strategy. That's what I was talking about earlier, talking about a plan. What methods have you got to communicate with your community? Informal events, we've talked about them. You know, drop-in sessions, workshop, walking tours, you know, those types of things, whether and sort of logging them in the plan as whether it's a formal activity or an informal activity, you know, how many people you've engaged with, and collaboration with local partners as well in this sort of early engagement. Let's just get the next one up. Here we've got the Regulation 14 pre-submission consultation. So the publication of the draft plan for at least 6 weeks, where you're sending copies of the plan, who are the relevant stakeholders, what public events are you going to organise, and then these opportunities for written feedback. Post-submission consultation and the referendum. So publicising the submitted plan, engaging with the independent examiner, communicating the examiner's report, informing residents about the referendum, and sharing sort of factual information about the plan. So these were all the sort of the advice and the guidance that I could see from the relevant documents that talk about the consultation element of a neighbourhood plan. But what I'm all about is about understanding what's best practice. Now, this is where it can get scary, because this is where we can talk about the Rolls-Royce approach. And I don't necessarily think you need to worry about that. I just think understanding perhaps what really good looks like is useful, and then tailoring that to what you can achieve is a way forward. So here we're talking about transparency and openness. So